There comes a moment in life when silence becomes louder than arguments, when distance becomes stronger than attachment, and when walking away becomes the greatest act of power a person can ever display. That day is not a day of loss. It is a day of awakening. It is the day the super empath finally remembers who they are. A super empath is not defined by how much pain they can endure, but by the depth of purpose they carry within them. Their nature is often misunderstood because the world tends to interpret their kindness as weakness and their patience as permission. But in truth, a super empath is driven by something far greater than emotional attachment. They are driven by an internal calling to bring meaning, healing, and transformation into the spaces they occupy. From the beginning, their ability to feel deeply is not a flaw, it is a design. They are wired to perceive what others overlook, to sense emotional undercurrents, and to respond with compassion where others may respond with indifference. This depth allows them to connect, to nurture, and to invest in people in ways that are rare. But this same gift becomes dangerous when it is disconnected from awareness. When purpose is not understood, the super empath can easily begin to operate from pain instead of intention. This is where the confusion begins. They start to believe that their role is to fix, to rescue, and to sacrifice endlessly. They internalize the idea that love must come at the cost of self-abandonment. And because they can see the potential in people, especially in those who are broken or emotionally unavailable, they hold on longer than they should. They convince themselves that if they just give more, understand more, or stay a little longer, things will eventually change. But purpose was never meant to imprison you. Purpose is meant to guide you, not drain you. It is meant to elevate you, not diminish you. When a super empath begins to operate from pain, they lose sight of this truth. They start pouring into environments that do not honor their value. They give energy to people who only know how to take. And over time, this imbalance creates exhaustion, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. You must understand something critical. Your ability to endure pain does not mean you are meant to stay in it. Endurance without direction leads to destruction. And many super empaths confuse their strength with their tolerance for unhealthy situations. They think being strong means staying through disrespect, inconsistency, and emotional neglect. But real strength is not measured by how much you can survive. It is measured by your ability to choose what aligns with your worth. The moment a super empath reconnects with their purpose, everything begins to change. They start to realize that their gift was never meant to be given indiscriminately. It was meant to be protected, nurtured, and shared in environments that reciprocate and respect it. They begin to understand that not every situation deserves their compassion, and not every person is entitled to their energy. This awareness creates a shift in identity. They stop seeing themselves as someone who must always be there for others at any cost. Instead, they begin to see themselves as someone who carries value, someone whose presence is meaningful, and someone whose energy must be invested wisely. They learn that saying no is not rejection, it is alignment. They realize that boundaries are not barriers to love, but structures that protect it. And as this understanding deepens, the super empath begins to detach from the idea that pain is part of their purpose. They recognize that while they may encounter pain, they are not designed to live in it. Pain may visit, but it is not meant to stay. Their purpose is rooted in growth, in clarity, in impact, not in suffering. This is the transformation that changes everything. When a super empath operates from purpose, they no longer chase validation. They no longer seek approval from those who cannot appreciate them. They become anchored within themselves. Their decisions are no longer driven by emotional reactions, but by intentional choices that reflect their self-worth. They begin to ask different questions. Not how can I make this work, but does this align with who I am becoming? Not how much can I tolerate, but what do I truly deserve? These questions shift their entire reality because they redirect their focus from external validation to internal truth. And here is where their true power emerges. A super empath who understands their purpose becomes unstoppable, not because they fight harder, but because they choose wiser. They are no longer easily manipulated by guilt, obligation, or emotional pressure. They see situations clearly and they respond with intention. Their compassion remains, but it is no longer blind. It is guided by wisdom. This is why the day they walk away is so significant. It is not an act of giving up. It is an act of returning to themselves. It is the moment they refuse to allow their purpose to be overshadowed by pain any longer. It is the moment they reclaim their energy, their identity, and their direction. And once that happens, they do not go back to who they used to be. Because when you truly understand your purpose, you can no longer tolerate anything that contradicts it. The narcissist operates from a fundamentally different internal system than the super empath, and understanding this difference is essential if you are ever going to break free from confusion. What often appears to be connection is, in reality, control carefully disguised as intimacy. The narcissist does not engage in relationships to build mutual growth, emotional safety, or shared purpose. Instead, they engage to establish dominance, secure admiration, and maintain a steady source of emotional supply. At the core of their behavior is an insatiable need to feel significant, but this need is not fulfilled through genuine connection. True connection requires vulnerability, empathy, and accountability, qualities that the narcissist avoids because they threaten the image they work so hard to protect. So instead of connecting, they construct an illusion. They mirror your values, reflect your desires, and temporarily become what you need. Not because they understand you, but because they are studying you. This is why, in the beginning, everything feels intense and almost perfect. It feels like you have finally found someone who sees you, understands you, and aligns with you. But what you are experiencing is not depth, it is strategy. It is the setup phase where control is quietly being established. The more you open up, the more information they gather. And the more information they gather, the more effectively they can influence your emotions. Control for the narcissist is not always loud or aggressive. In fact, it is often subtle, calculated, and emotionally intelligent in appearance. They control through inconsistency, giving affection one moment and withdrawing it the next. They control through confusion, making you question your own perceptions and feelings. They control through dependency, slowly positioning themselves as the center of your emotional world so that your stability becomes tied to their approval. And here is the critical part. The narcissist does not want a partner. They want a source. A source of validation, attention, admiration, and emotional energy. This is why no matter how much you give, it never feels like enough. Because the goal is not mutual fulfillment. The goal is continuous supply. And supply must never feel secure, because if you feel secure, you may stop overgiving. So they create cycles of idealization, where you are lifted up and made to feel special. Cycles of devaluation, where your worth is questioned and your confidence is shaken. Cycles of silence or withdrawal, where you are left anxious and seeking reconnection. Each cycle is designed to deepen your emotional investment while strengthening their control. And over time, you may begin to confuse these emotional highs and lows with passion or complexity. But in truth, it is instability engineered to keep you engaged. A genuine connection brings clarity. It brings peace. It allows you to be consistent in who you are without fear of losing the relationship. But control does the opposite. It creates anxiety. It forces you to constantly adjust, overthink, and prove your worth. It makes you feel like you are always one step away from losing everything. This is why the super empath struggles for so long. Because they approach the relationship with sincerity, assuming that the other person is operating from the same place. They believe that love can heal, that patience can transform, and that understanding can resolve everything. But you cannot fix a system that is designed to exploit your strengths. The narcissist does not respond to love the way a healthy individual does. They respond to leverage. They respond to what gives them advantage. And when your kindness becomes predictable, when your forgiveness becomes guaranteed, and when your presence becomes constant, it no longer holds value in their system. It becomes expected. And anything that is expected can be controlled. This is why boundaries feel threatening to them, because boundaries interrupt control. Boundaries introduce consequences. Boundaries remind them that you are not just a source. You are an individual with autonomy. And autonomy is the one thing they cannot dominate without resistance. So when you begin to see the truth, when you begin to recognize that what you thought was connection was actually control, everything changes. You stop personalizing their behavior. You stop blaming yourself for the inconsistency. You stop trying to earn something that was never meant to be given freely. You begin to understand that the issue was never your effort. It was the foundation of the relationship itself. And this realization is powerful because it shifts you from confusion to clarity. It breaks the illusion that kept you emotionally invested. It reveals that what you were fighting for was not a real connection, but a controlled experience designed to keep you giving. Once you truly grasp this, you no longer chase their approval. You no longer seek validation from someone who only values control. You begin to withdraw your energy, not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. Because you finally understand that connection cannot exist where control is the priority. And anything that requires you to lose yourself in order to keep it is not a relationship. It is a system of control. And the moment you see it for what it truly is, you take back your power. Awareness is the moment when illusion loses its power over you. It does not arrive loudly, nor does it announce itself with dramatic signs. Instead, it comes quietly, often in the form of repeated discomfort, unanswered questions, and a growing sense that something is not aligned. At first, you may try to dismiss it. You may tell yourself that you are overthinking, that things will improve, that patience will fix what feels broken. But awareness is persistent. It does not fade simply because you ignore it. It strengthens. You begin to notice patterns you once overlooked. The same conversations that lead nowhere. The same apologies that bring no change. The same emotional cycles that leave you drained instead of fulfilled. And suddenly what once felt confusing becomes clear. You start to realize that what you were calling hope was actually tolerance, and what you were calling love was often one-sided investment. This realization can feel uncomfortable, even painful, because awareness forces you to confront truth. And truth has a way of dismantling the stories we tell ourselves to survive. You may begin to question your own role, why you stayed, why you gave so much, why you ignored the signs. But this is not a moment for self-condemnation. It is a moment for growth. Awareness is not here to shame you. It is here to free you. Because the moment you see clearly, you can no longer pretend not to see. And that is where the shift begins. Awareness changes your perspective. It moves you from emotional reaction to intentional thinking. Instead of asking, how can I fix this person? You begin to ask, why am I accepting this behavior? Instead of focusing on their potential, you start evaluating their patterns. Instead of holding on to what could be, you start recognizing what is. This shift is powerful because it transfers control back to you. For a long time, your energy may have been directed outward, trying to understand, trying to heal, trying to maintain peace. But awareness redirects that energy inward. You begin to reflect on your boundaries, your standards, your self-worth. You start to understand that your value is not determined by how much you can endure, but by how well you can protect your peace. And here is the truth that many struggle to accept. Once awareness enters your life, you cannot go back to unconscious tolerance. You cannot unsee the manipulation once you recognize it. You cannot unfeel the imbalance once you understand it. You cannot unknow the patterns once they are revealed. This is why awareness is the turning point of freedom. It closes the door on denial. However, awareness alone is not enough. It must be followed by courage. Because seeing the truth and acting on it are two different things. There is a moment where you stand at a crossroads. On one side is familiarity, the comfort of what you know, even if it is unhealthy. On the other side is growth, the uncertainty of change, but also the promise of peace. Many people see the truth but remain where they are because change feels intimidating. But the super empath is different. The super empath, once aware, begins to feel a deeper calling, a quiet but undeniable urge to choose better. And this is where transformation begins. Awareness empowers you to set boundaries without guilt. It gives you the strength to say no without explanation. It allows you to step back without feeling responsible for someone else's reactions. Because you now understand that protecting your energy is not selfish, it is necessary. You also begin to detach emotionally, not out of coldness, but out of wisdom. You no longer invest in conversations that lead to confusion. You no longer chase clarity from someone who thrives in chaos. You no longer seek validation from a source that cannot provide it. Instead, you become grounded in your own understanding. And something remarkable happens. You begin to trust yourself again. For a long time, you may have doubted your instincts. You may have ignored your intuition in favor of giving the benefit of the doubt. But awareness reconnects you with that inner voice. The voice that noticed the inconsistencies. The voice that questioned the behavior. The voice that knew even when you tried to silence it. Now that voice becomes your guide. And as you continue to grow in awareness, your tolerance for dysfunction decreases. Not because you have become harsh, but because you have become aligned. You understand what you deserve, and you are no longer willing to settle for less. This is freedom, not just physical distance, but mental and emotional liberation. Freedom from confusion. Freedom from constant emotional exhaustion. Freedom from trying to fix what is not yours to fix. Awareness gives you clarity, and clarity gives you power. And once you have that power, you begin to make decisions that reflect your worth. So when awareness arrives, do not resist it. Do not fear it. Do not try to negotiate with it. Embrace it, because it is guiding you toward a higher level of understanding. It is preparing you to step out of cycles that were never meant to define you. And remember this, awareness is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of a new one. A journey where you are no longer controlled by confusion, but directed by clarity. A journey where your choices are no longer based on fear, but on self-respect. A journey where you finally align your life with your true value. Because the moment you become aware is the moment you begin to become free. Detachment is often misunderstood because people associate it with coldness, indifference, or emotional shutdown. But in reality, true detachment is none of those things. It is not the absence of feeling, it is the mastery of feeling. It is the moment when you no longer allow your emotions to be used against you, manipulated, or exploited. It is a decision rooted in awareness, not avoidance. And for the super empath, this is one of the most powerful shifts that can ever take place. You see, a super empath naturally connects deeply. They feel intensely, they give freely, and they often believe that their emotional depth is a bridge that can reach even the most distant hearts. But when that depth is consistently met with control, manipulation, or emotional inconsistency, something begins to change. Not overnight, not suddenly, but gradually. The empath begins to realize that their greatest strength has been used as an entry point for their greatest exhaustion. And this is where detachment becomes necessary. Detachment is not about turning off your heart. It is about reclaiming ownership of it. It is understanding that just because you can feel deeply does not mean you must stay deeply connected to what harms you. It is recognizing that your compassion should not come at the cost of your peace. Many people stay in toxic dynamics because they believe that leaving means they no longer care. But that is a false belief. You can care and still choose distance. You can love and still establish boundaries. You can understand someone and still refuse to be consumed by their dysfunction. This is strategic strength because the narcissistic dynamic thrives on emotional access. It feeds on reactions, on explanations, on your need to be understood. Every time you engage at that level, you are unintentionally reinforcing the cycle. But when you detach, you disrupt that pattern. You remove the fuel. You stop participating in the emotional exchange that sustains the imbalance. And that takes discipline. Detachment requires you to sit with your own emotions instead of seeking resolution from the very source that caused the confusion. It requires you to resist the urge to explain yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you. It requires you to accept that closure is not always something you receive. It is something you create within yourself. This is where many people struggle because detachment forces you to confront truth without illusion. It reveals the reality of the situation without the comfort of hope that things will magically change. And that truth can be uncomfortable. It can challenge everything you believed about the connection, about the person, and even about yourself. But within that discomfort lies freedom. Because once you detach, you begin to see clearly. You begin to recognize patterns without emotional distortion. You begin to understand that what you were trying to fix was never yours to fix. And most importantly, you begin to redirect your energy, not outward, but inward. That is power. Power is not controlling someone else's behavior. Power is controlling your response to it. Power is deciding what you allow into your mental and emotional space. Power is choosing peace, even when chaos is trying to pull you back in. And when the super empath reaches this level of awareness, their entire presence changes. They no longer react impulsively. They no longer feel the need to prove their worth. They no longer chase clarity from confusion. Instead, they become grounded, intentional, focused. Their silence becomes purposeful. Their distance becomes protective. Their energy becomes selective. This is not weakness. This is evolution. Because the truth is, anyone can stay emotionally entangled. It does not require growth to remain in a cycle. But it takes strength, real strength, to step back, to observe, and to say, I will not lose myself trying to hold on to something that is not aligned with who I am becoming. Satashabi Yomainti Doant. And once you reach that point, something remarkable happens. You stop seeking validation from the very place that once drained you. You stop measuring your worth based on someone else's inability to see it. You stop overextending yourself in hopes of receiving what was never being offered in the first place. You become self-sustained. And that is the ultimate form of freedom. Because when you are no longer emotionally dependent on a toxic dynamic, you are no longer controlled by it. When you detach, you break the invisible chains that kept you bound, not physically, but mentally and emotionally. You reclaim your focus. You reclaim your time. You reclaim your identity. So, understand this clearly. Detachment is not about disconnecting from others. It is about reconnecting with yourself. It is about protecting your peace with intention. It is about choosing clarity over confusion, stability over chaos, and growth over stagnation. And once you master that, you will never again confuse attachment with love. Walking away is often misunderstood as abandonment, as quitting, or as giving up. But in reality, it is one of the most intelligent and necessary decisions a person can make when their identity is at risk. When a super empath reaches the point of walking away, it is not impulsive. It is the result of accumulated awareness, repeated emotional exhaustion, and the realization that staying is costing more than leaving ever could. This moment marks the beginning of restoration. You must understand that identity is not just who you think you are. It is what you consistently accept, tolerate, and allow into your life. Over time, in a toxic dynamic, the super empath begins to lose pieces of themselves. Not all at once, but gradually. Their voice becomes quieter. Their needs become secondary. Their boundaries become blurred. They start negotiating with their own values just to maintain connection. And without realizing it, they drift further away from their authentic self. Walking away interrupts that process. It creates space to think clearly, to feel honestly, and to rediscover the parts of yourself that were suppressed. That distance becomes a form of healing, because you cannot rebuild your identity in the same environment that distorted it. You cannot regain clarity while constantly being pulled into confusion. Separation is not just physical, it is psychological and emotional. It is a reset. The super empath begins to remember who they were before the manipulation, before the emotional cycles, before the constant need to prove their worth. They reconnect with their inner voice, the one that was silenced, and that voice becomes stronger with every moment of distance. What once felt like doubt begins to transform into certainty. Self-worth is also restored in this process, but it does not happen instantly. At first, there may be discomfort. There may be moments of questioning, even guilt. This is because the super empath has been conditioned to prioritize others, often at the expense of themselves. So choosing themselves can feel unfamiliar. But unfamiliar does not mean wrong, it means growth. As time passes, something powerful begins to shift. The super empath starts to redefine their standards. They no longer accept inconsistent behavior. They no longer chase clarity from confusion. They no longer overextend themselves to maintain relationships that do not reciprocate. Instead, they begin to operate from a place of self-respect. Self-worth is not built through what others give you. It is built through what you refuse to accept. And walking away becomes the ultimate declaration of that refusal. It says, I recognize my value even if you do not. It says, I will not stay in an environment that diminishes me. It says, I choose alignment over attachment. This is where true empowerment begins. Because once the super empath reclaims their identity, they also reclaim their power. They no longer depend on external validation. They become grounded within themselves. Their confidence is no longer fragile. It is stable, rooted in self-awareness rather than approval. Another important transformation occurs in how they approach relationships moving forward. They become more discerning, not closed off. They begin to recognize the difference between genuine connection and emotional dependency. They learn that love should not feel like constant effort without return. They understand that healthy relationships are built on mutual respect, consistency, and emotional safety. Walking away also strengthens boundaries. Before, boundaries may have been flexible, easily crossed, or even ignored. But after this experience, boundaries become non-negotiable. Not out of fear, but out of wisdom. The super empath learns that boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They are standards that define what is allowed in. And with these boundaries, they protect their energy more intentionally. They no longer pour into empty containers. They invest where there is growth, where there is appreciation, and where there is balance. Perhaps the most profound part of this journey is the internal peace that follows. It may not be immediate, but it is inevitable. Because once you remove yourself from constant emotional turbulence, your mind and heart begin to stabilize. The chaos fades. The clarity increases. And in that clarity, you begin to see life differently. You realize that you were never asking for too much. You were simply asking the wrong person. You realize that your capacity to love was never the problem. It was your willingness to give it to someone who could not receive it. And most importantly, you realize that you are whole on your own. Walking away does not make the super empath empty. It makes them complete. They are no longer defined by what they endured, but by what they overcame. They carry wisdom instead of wounds, strength instead of confusion, and clarity instead of doubt. And from that place, they begin to rebuild, not just their life, but their identity. This is why walking away is not an ending. It is a return to self, a return to truth, a return to the person they were always meant to be. Silence is often misunderstood because people associate it with weakness, avoidance, or fear. But in reality, silence, when chosen intentionally, is one of the highest forms of power a person can exercise. For the super empath, silence is not the absence of words. It is the presence of awareness, discipline, and self-respect. It is a decision that says, I no longer give access to my energy where it is not valued. You must understand that the narcissist feeds on reactions. Every argument, every explanation, every attempt to be understood becomes fuel for their control. They are not seeking resolution, they are seeking engagement. And as long as the super empath continues to respond emotionally, the cycle remains alive. This is why silence becomes transformational. It breaks the cycle at its core. When the super empath chooses silence, they are not ignoring the situation, they are rising above it. They are recognizing that not every battle deserves their voice. Not every misunderstanding deserves clarification. Not every attack deserves a defense. This level of discernment does not come easily. It is developed through pain, reflection, and growth. Silence requires strength because it goes against instinct. The natural desire is to explain yourself, to defend your intentions, to prove your worth. But the super empath eventually realizes something powerful. Those who are committed to misunderstanding you will never be convinced by your words. So instead of exhausting themselves trying to change someone else's perception, they redirect that energy toward preserving their own peace. And here is where silence becomes authority. It becomes a boundary that does not need to be announced. It becomes a message that does not require explanation. It becomes a standard that says access to me is a privilege, not a right. This is the shift that transforms the super empath from someone who overextends to someone who self-governs. Silence also creates space. Space for healing, space for clarity, and space for identity to be restored. When you're constantly engaging in emotional chaos, you lose connection with yourself. Your thoughts become influenced, your emotions become reactive, and your decisions become compromised. But when you step into silence, you begin to hear yourself again. You begin to recognize your needs, your values, and your truth without interference. This is why silence is not empty, it is full of revelation. In that quiet space, the super empath starts to understand patterns they once ignored. They see the manipulation they once excused. They recognize the cycles they once participated in. And with that awareness comes power, the power to choose differently. Now let us address something important. Silence does not mean you have nothing to say. It means you are no longer available to say it to the wrong audience. That distinction is critical because the super empath still has a voice, still has wisdom, still has love, but they become selective with where and how they express it. And this selectiveness is what protects their energy moving forward. The narcissist, on the other hand, becomes disoriented in the presence of silence. They are used to emotional reactions, to predictable patterns, to having influence over your state of mind. But when silence replaces reaction, their strategies lose effectiveness. There is no argument to manipulate, no emotion to exploit, no engagement to control. And this is what makes silence so powerful. It removes the very thing the narcissist depends on. But understand this clearly. The purpose of silence is not to punish the other person. It is to protect yourself. It is not about teaching them a lesson. It is about honoring your own boundaries. Because the moment silence becomes a strategy for revenge, it loses its purity. True silence is rooted in self-respect, not retaliation. As the super empath continues to practice silence, something remarkable happens internally. Emotional dependence begins to fade. The need for validation begins to dissolve. The urge to explain, to chase, to fix, these habits start to lose their grip. And in their place, a new strength emerges, a quiet confidence that does not need to be proven. This is the evolution of power. Power is no longer loud, reactive, or defensive. It becomes calm, grounded, and intentional. The super empath no longer feels the need to attend every argument they are invited to. They no longer feel obligated to respond to every message, every accusation, every attempt to pull them back into dysfunction. They become anchored in something deeper than emotion. They become anchored in identity. And once identity is established, silence becomes effortless. Because now it is not something you force, it is something you embody. You naturally withdraw from what disrupts your peace. You naturally disengage from what dishonors your value. You naturally protect your energy because you understand its worth. So when you embrace silence at this level, you are not losing your voice. You are refining it. You are choosing to speak only where you are respected, to invest only where there is reciprocity, and to show up only where there is alignment. And that is the ultimate power of silence. It does not just remove you from chaos. It transforms you into someone who no longer belongs in it.